Well, Jenny, I'm really excited to get to chat with you today.
Thanks, Erica. Me too, for sure.
So, I want to start off and just have you share with everyone a little bit more about you and what got you interested and really wanting to help women avoid burning out with their workouts.
Yeah, especially for this conversation. I know that's what we're going to focus on. I think that that's such an important message for all of us overall in life, men and women, but women in particular with workouts because of things that we'll talk about with how I think fitness should look different for our bodies. And that's why I consider myself a feminine fitness specialist because we really need to get away from sort of this constant hustle mentality and learn to what I call sweat and sync with our cycles. And it's really embodying what nature models to us as well. My background, though, came from a bachelor's in exercise physiology and master's in sports psychology. And so I started my career in fitness as a personal trainer, working with people one-on-one and in small groups. And of course, I saw these patterns of people struggling with maintaining the demands of regular life along with the workouts and the high intensity. But it just was sort of like I was embedded in that culture of, well, just keep going, show up anyway, those kinds of things. And I'm not here to say that those messages aren't helpful because, I just shared recently in a post on my Instagram, even about how, I showed up for a swim and it was uncomfortable for the first 30 minutes. Like it was hard. I had to push through and I didn't feel in flow. I wasn't in my groove. And the last 20 minutes were pure flow state, just like that bliss that a lot of you who work out can probably resonate with. And it's that feeling of just effortlessness. And so it's not that you don't ever push through to sometimes get to those states. But what I'm talking about is different because it's about listening to your body during the times that it's time to take a rest versus push. And that's something that I didn't learn for a very long time. I didn't learn it in my fitness education. I certainly didn't practice it in my life because being someone who is very ambitious and just likes to go and do things, it's just of my personality. I was into endurance, sports, movement. I was a runner specifically, anything ranging from the short distances of 5Ks in college to then going on to do ultra distances. And just training really hard was fun for me. And it was great to challenge my body. But after a while, and probably contributing to a lot of other life factors contributing to this, it wasn't just the workouts, but during my personal training time, found myself completely exhausted and not able to keep up with my own personal workouts, having fatigue and recovery issues that I hadn't experienced before. I started having hormonal challenges. And once I went to seek help and guidance with this and just figure out what was going on, I realized that I had really brought myself to that place of constantly being in that sympathetic nervous system state. My adrenals needed support and my hormones had, cascaded all over the place just as a result of my activities. And like I said, it wasn't just the workouts, it was how I was approaching my everyday life as well. But it was not understanding the importance of a cycle and the importance of work and hustle with balanced rest and ease. And I know that is obvious, like to all of us, and it makes sense when we think about it and say it, but how much are we actually practicing it? And I think it's really challenging to practice it in a culture that praises work and rest or work and hustle and doesn't praise so much the other side of that with rest and taking time that's downtime and those sorts of things. So I really had to come to it through my own breakdown of things and wanting to get better. And as I started to put it into practice and started to talk to other women about this and realize that this was something that we could use our own bodies as a model for, and also looking to nature, which had always been a massive guide for me and continued to be, like in my work with wild wellness. So wild to me is very nature inspired and of the natural world, but it also happened to be an acronym for Women into Living Their Dreams. And that came to me at one time when I realized, like, we have to take care of our bodies if we want to live the lives that we want to live, if we have these goals and have these dreams of being here and doing these things. But it all comes down to taking care of ourselves first. So that's what my main message is now. And also, I like to say it's not a sprint, it's a cycle, because again, we have to balance that effort with rest. And there's really simple ways to do it when you recognize the framework that we actually have to go off of.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat about this today because I, just like you, have dealt with overexerting myself, working out way too much. I mean, when you're in that exercise science field, there's just something about like, just do it all. Like, yes. I mean, I remember like working out in the morning, I would be at the gym until it closed. I worked there. It was like my home, right? Mm-hmm. And you just push and push and push because that's just kind of that mentality, right? And if you don't, it's like, oh, you're not strong enough or you're not doing enough. But ultimately, and I know for me, when I was in that, I actually ended up having, yes, a lot of adrenal issues. I actually gained weight. I was working towards like I wouldn't call it like it wasn't like a bodybuilding competition, but it was like more of like an agility strength competition. And I put on so much muscle and so much fat at the same time. My body fat went up like, I don't know, 5 or 8. It was a crazy amount percentage, 5 or 8% in like 2 months, because my body was like, you are destroying yourself. And so in order for us to keep sustaining this level of physical punishment, we're going to hold all this. And so it was the craziest experience, right? That like, that's what the body does. And I can't tell you how many times I've had these conversations with women, whether it's one-on-one client or, in my programs as well, where it's like, no, you actually need to do less. And women freak out about that. Can we talk about that for a little bit? Like, what's the psychology, Jenni, behind that? Like, okay, it's like, we're so pushing to like do more, burn those calories because that's what you need. But ultimately, that's actually that stress, right? Is bad.
I experienced the same thing too, what you talked about with sort of that unexplained or mysterious weight gain, because I wasn't doing anything different in terms of like trying to gain weight or doing anything with diet or different with exercise other than pushing the way that I was and just working out too hard, like you said. But I was also confused about that. And it all made sense when I realized it was back to the hormones and body wanting to hold on to fat and cortisol levels being all out of whack. So yeah, our mindset around this with feeling guilty for taking rest days. And what was this thing that you said specifically just a minute ago about?
No, I was just saying, like, what's the psychology, right, behind women in particular? Why is it that from a psychological perspective or input in any way, right? Like, we put that pressure on ourselves that it's like, we're heard like, oh, well, work out longer, work out harder, just keep going. And we feed into that. A lot of women feed into that, right? And it's like almost when I have to tell women to like, it's time to back off, they fight me on it. And it's like, well, I'm not going to argue with someone about it. These are the facts, right? So like, I'd love to hear if you have a different perspective, a deeper perspective that you want to share with, like, what do you share with the women out there that are like doing this and burning themselves out, and their workouts are not the only thing, but they are an added piece, right? Because so many women think like, oh, I'm working out and I'm running or doing this to like decrease my stress, but it's actually more like a fake. They think it's decreasing their stress, but it's also like, what's all wrapped up in that, like, go hard or go home mentality, I guess.
Yeah. What you just said too about having that desire to work out so that it does lower stress. But then when does that become like you're working out now too much and it's actually creating stress in your body? Like, that's one piece of it. And then I think the other piece is just, where does this mindset come in the first place? And I think when I reflected on it myself and just in hearing from other women, it is that guilt over needing to feel like if we did something, then it contributes to our feeling of of worthiness, of validation, of like, I'm okay, I'm doing okay, I'm doing good. It all goes back to, again, the way that our culture and Western culture anyway is structured, and many other cultures around the world too, really, where women especially are sort of set up to think in that way, where one, we're trying to keep up with a masculine and linear modeled culture, meaning that, you know, if you look at the 9 to 5 work schedule, the 5-day work week, and even if, you know, that's like the framework, right? But if you go beyond that, like, that's better, and you're doing great, and you're a hustler, and you're a go-getter, and those sorts of things. So like, that is the culture that we're in, and fitness isn't an exception. It kind of came from that same way of thinking. And so I think the first thing to realize is just that you don't beat yourself up over having that desire, those thoughts, or think like, how am I ever going to get out of this? Because it's just the way that I am. Because once you realize where it's coming from, I think sometimes that gives you power to be able to shift that within yourself. And I know once I realized the cultural programming that I had taken on and where that had come from, it helped me in one way to see that. And I know it helps a lot of other women too, because we're so in it that sometimes we don't even see it. So when you do recognize it, that's one thing. And then another thing is, you know, when we do something and we get a positive reward for it, so we go and do a run and it feels really good, we get into that flow state, then we want to keep going back for more, and it builds our confidence the more that we do. So if we're craving confidence, if we're craving that feeling of, kind of like I was saying before, like a good job girl kind of pat on the back attitude, if we're craving that because maybe even it's missing in other areas of our life, maybe in our career or relationships, or we're just feeling a little bit invalidated in other areas, we might try to seek it through fitness, through our bodies. And I don't think there's anything that's wrong with that. It's not that it's all bad. We have to like hold both beliefs here parallel, and just be able to allow them to both be in existence together, because I think that can be really beneficial when you move your body. It helps you feel more confident in yourself, more like that you can do something physically that then actually gives you something back that you consider maybe mentally, even though we can't separate out the two. But I think you know what I mean. If it's, you're working towards a goal that's outside of fitness, but yet your workouts actually are helping you to feel like a confident, capable, strong person, you carry that into other areas of your life. So that can be helpful in that sense. But if we're kind of leaning on it to do that in ways that are abandoning or disregarding our own cycle and our own health and well-being, then we're missing that part. And that's just the piece we have to keep in mind if we are using it for that. You know, it's the whole framework of self-efficacy, it's called. When we take action and do something, or we see someone else doing something, it gives us the encouragement to continue to do it, or we get that positive feedback and reinforcement, so we keep doing it. So one piece in that, like I said, is the helpful part of being able to take that into other areas of our life, but know that that self-efficacy for things is actually specific to the activity that you're doing. So when you do have confidence in your workouts, that is really specific to what you're doing there. So I'm not saying that we can't pull on those things. You know, maybe you're just thinking I contradicted what I just said, because we can pull on those things a little bit, but know that there's still things outside of that that you might want to think about within your own personal development, and just considering, you know, why do I feel this way about this area of my life? Or what is it that I'm trying to seek in my workouts that maybe I'm not getting somewhere else? Because it can only carry over so much. So that piece that I said about, sure, the workout confidence spills over into you having confidence in other things. Yes, but only so much. And you're not going to be able to just rely on the workouts to do that for you at 100% level, because in the process, you'll probably sacrifice your health along the way.
Yeah. And so basically what I hear you saying is like, are we using our exercise as filling in the void for somewhere else in our life potentially?
Yeah. And even with the stress piece, like you said about, a lot of times we do it to de-stress, which is helpful, But again, there's like a continuum of that you have to find that balance of this is the level at which it provides me an outlet for managing stress in my life and feeling good. And now this is the tipping point where actually exercise in itself is a stress. And I feel unmotivated, I feel tired. Those are all signs that you may be having too much stress, and it may not only be coming from exercise, it may be coming a lot from other areas of your life. But unfortunately, physical stress like exercise is a stress on the body, and your body doesn't know the difference between that and having an intense argument with someone or being in a relationship that is challenging for you. So you have to know that all of those kind of stressors are things that you need to consider when you're deciding how hard you are pushing yourself in workouts and how you're managing it. And I would also say that it probably takes less than what we realize or what we think it does in order to use exercise as a tool to manage our stress. And it doesn't always have to be hard either. Like you might think that, well, I have to do that, hard run or that long run. I have to be out there for a couple hours to like really get out of my head and into my body and forget everything, or I have to do it this way. But I would challenge you to think about how you might be able to do it different. And if you never have tried other things, then you might not know what those other things could provide for you, especially in the state that you're in now, because we change. And in the state you're in now, potentially, if you're feeling a little overworked, over exercised, then you might find that actually a more relaxing, more what you would consider a more restful, like almost like a rest day, like taking a hike maybe, or doing I don't know, sometimes it's always different for everyone, but if your version of a hard day is a HIIT workout and a rest day is a Pilates workout, then you might think, well, the Pilates workout doesn't do as much for me mentally because I don't get that way, but maybe it's something else. And maybe it's other practices in your life that are going to help you manage stress besides exercise. So allow them all to work together, maybe is a good way to think about it too.
Yeah. I love how you
Things
said
like
that.
sleep, meditation, those kinds of things.
Yeah, because everything is intertwined, right? I talk about this all the time. It's all connected, ladies. And those that have listened for a long time know that comes out of my mouth all the time.
Yeah.
It is. And so many times we compartmentalize like our exercise, like over here in a box. And it's more about like, okay, but what are you doing the rest of your days? And how is it all combining? And actually like, I love talking about how like actually doing less in a workout, or I like to talk about it as your movement practice. Sometimes too, it can be more gentle. And like, you talked about like the HIIT versus the Pilates, right? And it's like Pilates can do so much more for your body than most women realize, because it is gentle. It allows you that to actually like become more deeper connected within yourself, right? We're like, I think sometimes when we want to go do that hard workout, it may or may not always be for the right reasons. And not that there's anything wrong with doing that, right? That's totally fine, but
yeah. And in my programs, I always challenge women to think about their beliefs around fitness and why you think that certain workouts are hard versus easy, and where that mentality came from, because we all sort of have that if we were honest with ourselves, and what we think is enough or not enough, or what we think, like I said, is hard or easy, challenging, not challenging, hustle day, rest day. And it's just interesting to challenge that and think, just like a lot of other beliefs in our life that we might challenge, like, is that really true? Or is that just something that I've been believing because that's what I was taught back in high school when we did this in, our strength and conditioning for sports or whatever it might be. That's just one example.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I think that is so important for everyone to think about. And I talk sometimes about like our childhood ego, right? And so like you mentioned like high school, and it's like sometimes we have to go back to like the conditioning probably was from sometime before you were 21.
Oh yeah.
And it stays with you. And then you like feel ingrained like, oh, but this is how I was taught, so this is the way I have to keep doing it. But ultimately it's like, no, but if you want something to change, you have to change the way you're doing things. And the thought process is huge. So let's get into talk about cycling. And I want to mention that you already pointed out, women today, we live in a very masculine dominated world, not just being men. It's the masculinity of scheduling and overly scheduled and going. And, and for women that don't, I guess, fully understand that, to understand that men have a 24-hour cycle and women have a 28-ish day cycle, which is very different. So like, it's like trying to put a circle in a square. It doesn't work.
Right. Especially doesn't work in your fitness programming, because most plans are created based on that thinking of a 24-hour cycle. Here's how many workouts to do a week. Here's what to do each day, kind of looking at it. Even when you're planning out a long program, like a half marathon training plan, it's still based on incrementally doing a little bit more each week. And there's not really the flow of following your own cycle and taking some downtime every 4 weeks or so.
Okay, so can you explain to everyone, when you're talking about our cycle, right? Obviously, it's our menstrual cycle. For women that don't have a menstrual cycle, either because they're pregnant or she's past menopause, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you follow more of like the moon cycle for those
Yeah,
women?
exactly. That's the anchor that I feel is, still an anchor we can rely on. Those anchors can be within our body, within our own cycle, or we can have that anchor outside. And it totally works that way to follow, anchoring to usually the new moon as considering that day one of your cycle, where you would be first day of your period. And then the full moon is your ovulation time. And then, back to new moon again, just to give you those two anchor points, at least. Obviously,
I love
there's
that. Yeah, that's awesome.
other waxing moon, waning moon too. But yeah, this applies to anyone. So
I love that. So when it comes to our workouts, what are the times that you're like, okay, these are the times of our cycle to go harder, where we can push ourselves if we'd like to.
yeah. Where it's beneficial to, even, we're optimizing what our physiology has created us to be able to do and experience. So really generally speaking, the first half of the cycle, and that's very general in a sense, because like day 1, 2, 3 of your period, when you're heavy bleeding, or even, you might even not feel like doing the hardest things until you get to like day 6 or 7. It might be that first weekish. So I'm not saying on your period, first half of your cycle, but the first half generally up to ovulation. So the follicular phase generally, and then ovulation time can be a little bit of highs and lows, because we start to have the fluctuation, and progesterone hormone actually kind of takes the rise, and estrogen plummets. So when estrogen is high, that's when we are more resilient to cortisol levels being high. We have better recovery. We are going to feel more energized generally. So that's a good time to challenge ourselves. And then generally the second half is when things start to slow down a little bit in terms of our energy, our sense of motivation, feeling like we can recover from hard things, whether that be a hard run or a hard weightlifting session. And so that's the luteal phase. So again, progesterone's higher then. And as we get closer to our period, that premenstrual phase, that a lot of women start to experience things like bloating or cramps or maybe migraines and all kinds of fluctuations. It really is a lot of times due to the hormonal factors, but just keep in mind that like that affects your workouts too. And you may have some ups and downs in that period of time. So I think that could be the most challenging phase of the cycle, not only because we have to accept the fact that it's the recovery phase, as I call it, but also because we're dealing with a lot of those other symptoms. So I call these phases the base phase, being the menstrual phase. I'll just parallel it over the menstruation phase. The build phase is the follicular. And then we have the peak phase of ovulation, and then the recovery phase, which is the luteal phase. And these actually mirror the seasons too. So inner winter, menstruation, and the base phase, inner spring would be the follicular, that build phase, peak summer, and then autumn, recovery phase, luteal. So if that helps to just to think about the energy of the seasons, no matter where you live, you kind of can resonate with that slight or drastic fluctuation of nature. And I think that can really help us in terms of how we embody it, not only in our lives, but in the workouts too.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned the seasons because I think in the winter, so many times it's like you kind of like, there's like, I think from a societal perspective, it's like, oh, work hard, right? To get your bikini body ready,
Yeah,
right? Like as you're coming
true.
out of winter and it's like, and don't get me wrong, I'm all for keeping your movement up in the winter. But if you live somewhere where it snows and it's cold out, like it can be a little bit more challenging because I'm like you, where I love to be out in nature. Although I will say this last couple winters I've really embraced, I've told myself I had to embrace the snow and embrace the cold and, get snowshoes and go outside. And so it's just different things, but it's things that are, very nourishing to my soul. Right. And I think that's a big part of all of this as well. And I'd love for you to, if there's things you want to share about that. And I love how you mentioned at the beginning, like the nature
Oh
piece.
yeah.
And I think there's something about that like just being out in the trees and the woods or the beach, wherever you can get nature, whatever that looks like, is just so nurturing for us, which is a natural stress decreaser, which is ultimately what we all want to kind of be working on.
Yeah, so working out outdoors is a double win. Yeah, in that way. I think part of working out in the flow of a cycle and aligning with nature and how we're taking care of ourselves and our well-being, it is what I describe as cyclical, seasonal, a little sweaty, and also a little soulful, because we can't just focus on the sweat part of workouts, which I think is kind of what we were talking about in the beginning, like what fitness culture and what our society sort of has taught us. There's just that one part of it. But if we do consider that it's not just about how hard you're going, the metrics that you're meeting, how many miles you ran, what your paces were, how many reps or sets you did, if you're advancing or not, like having a measure of something else that might be more soulful, that might be a measure of your confidence or a measure of your ability to, even, I guess I would consider soulful, even like your ability to do it consistently, but in honoring your cycle at the same time. So yes, you want to show up most days of the week, but also that soulful part is you having that body awareness to understand that you might show up differently in the couple days before your period than you do the few days right before ovulation. And that part is soulful because body awareness is tapping into those desires that you have to feel good and about what you're doing. And that's ultimately why I think most of us are doing it anyway. On some level, we want to feel good through movement. And I think that soulful part is really important, especially in the phases where the intensity and the physical effort isn't serving us the best to be the main focus. So like in that second half of the cycle, the few days leading up to our period, post ovulation, even during our period, it's helpful to have a well-rounded view of why we're moving, because those are the times that you can focus a little less maybe on the hard physical efforts and maybe the more intricate body awareness piece, or making sure you're doing practices that are supporting your workouts. Like we talk about things like, well, you need to stretch and have mobility exercises and work on those little things that might be issues for you, like a little shoulder thing or a little ankle thing that you have consistently going on. But a lot of times in our push and hustle, like we're just like, I'll do it later, or it's not stopping me too bad, so I won't work on it now. Or even something as seemingly unrelated as digestion or our sleep, like those sorts of things are that we connect them sometimes with exercise and with how we do in our workouts and how we feel, but not all the time. And if we realize that it's just a whole picture, then we can spend those other times of the month sometimes thinking about those things that maybe we've been neglecting, to set ourselves up then for not only feeling better and improving our well-being overall, but yes, P.S., that does help with your workouts too, if that's what you're going for.
Oh, absolutely. Your digestion is huge. I mean, it can help your energy by just working on decreasing inflammation. I mean, that's huge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And again, like you said, it's not about like, okay, well, I'll just take the week off before my period then, because I'm focusing on sleeping and de-stressing. Like, I'm not necessarily saying
Don't
that.
don't take the whole week
Yeah,
off.
it's about, well, that's a big question too. Like, how much time can I take off before I start to like lose the gains that I've made or lose fitness, that a lot of times we're worried about. But what I'm saying is to focus on other things in between. Like maybe instead of doing your 4 strength training sessions that week and doing them the same ones that you were doing in the follicular phase right after your period, maybe you're doing 2 of them that are going to be completely different because they're more body weight. And then maybe 2 of them are actually going to be like Pilates, because that's strength training and it just looks different than you lifting weights, but it's a different kind of strength training. And so it can just look different, even though like, okay, you still have the same goal of strengthening your muscles and working on possibly certain muscle groups, but you can do it in a different way. So there's lots of ways to do that for sure.
So can I share like an example? I'm kind of like visualizing this, right? So like in the first half-ish of the cycle, doing more, maybe those first couple days are, you know, more band strength, Pilates, still strengthening, right? And then like gearing up to do more hits if you want to go on longer runs, you want to do the heavier weights. And obviously you need to, you know, plan that so you still have kind of those days in between, not where you're not working out, but you're doing different things. So doing the more intense stuff those first 2 weeks, and then kind of tapering down to where you're changing up. Maybe you switch from doing, you know, lower, higher weight, lower reps in the beginning, and then switching it over to even like lighter weights, higher reps, doing bends, doing Pilates. Instead of maybe running so much, you're going to walk or hike or bike, like things that are still keeping you moving, and nourishing your soul and keeping your lymph moving and all of that, because you are going to feel better going into your period that you've been moving. But I love this whole idea of like thinking of it in a whole different way of like almost the periodization of like, oh, the first 2 weeks. Why did we learn this in college, Jenny? Like they should be teaching this stuff. Like this is so cool. It's so fun. Like, I think it helps too, right? As women to not put so much pressure on ourselves to be like, oh, yeah, my period's starting in a week. That's maybe like why I'm feeling a little bit this way. So maybe instead of pushing myself and feeling like I'm failing at it, I'm going to do something where I'm going to feel successful and freaking amazing. So it's like, it's literally just a mindset shift. Like that's how I look at it. Right.
No, that is the whole point too. I mean, not the whole point, but that is like a major piece where how many of us have beat ourselves up the week before our period when we're like, why am I mean, I did it for years. I just am thinking back to those times where it's like, why am I feeling this way like every couple weeks? And had no idea like that was a part of it at all. And I was just so frustrated and thinking, this was post like being diagnosed with adrenal issues. So I was thinking a lot of those times, like, am I still struggling with this? Am I not over it yet? And, you know, and that could have been the case. Like I could have still been challenged with it because I really hadn't implemented this yet. And to me, this was a key piece of me continuing to support my adrenals and my hormones overall. But yeah, to break it down like that is really helpful. And I have 4 questions that you can ask yourself in each of the phases to kind of think about this, because like when you gave that idea of here's kind of how it would look, here's an example of how it would look, that might be for someone who's into weights, Pilates, walking, maybe a little running. So what if you are more focused on one activity? What if you like to swim and occasionally do yoga? Or what if your combination is yoga, running, swimming? You know what I mean? Like there can be a lot of variation of, I see recommendations out there, for example, of this is how to work out in sync with your cycle. And I've been guilty of, not guilty, but like I have put out recommendations like this before too, just because it's a helpful framework to wrap your head around, oh, this is the flow, just kind of like you did. But I just wanted to add there that it could look different for you if those aren't your things, if those aren't your movements of choice. And the whole gist of what we're saying and what you were sharing in that example is like the flow of how you could be consistent throughout the whole thing, still taking rest here and there, but maybe pocketing in varying the intensity and, you know, understanding periodization, like you talked about, which is what I teach women in my programs. And because you don't have to be a fitness expert to understand that, you can look at, okay, this is how you progress in something and understand that as a framework and then apply it to any workout and any goal that you have. So back to the questions for the 4 phases, if you want me to go through those.
Yeah, like, I love that. Yeah.
The first phase with, like, just say it's day 1 of your period, you're in the menstrual phase. I really would recommend there's this whole misconception out there that like working out on your period will make you feel better. It'll help with the cramps and all that. I have never found that to be true for myself. Maybe the first day, a couple times when I've been bleeding on the full moon, like I have felt like going for a really easy bike ride or something, but that's rare. It's really rare. Mostly I want to go for an easy walk, but mostly like just do stretching. Like that's the movement of choice. I have no ambitions or goals that day of meeting any kind of, something on my training plan or, my goals list. It's really whatever I feel like doing. The goal is resting. I mean, you're actively releasing, and that takes energy, and it's a totally different focus. So it is okay for us to rest on our periods, especially those first few days when bleeding might be heavier. And I was talking to a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner and acupuncturist, and she talked about how sweat is considered a vital life force, just like our menstrual fluid is. And so you're depleting both when you completely sweat it out, if you do that at the same time, and that can really throw things off and just deplete too much. So it's interesting to think about that. So a great question to ask yourself in this phase, instead of like, what can I do today to do the hard workout so that I can, whatever else, whatever your goals are, it's what do I want to focus on in this next cycle? It's more of like setting yourself up for, okay, I'm starting a new cycle now. So what are my goals? What do I want to focus on in my workouts? What do I need to do to support myself to move every day? Like, how do I need to rearrange my schedule or do things differently in that way? So again, that's related to your exercise, right? It's related to your workouts, but it's not about the actual movement part, because that's not the only piece. And then as we move into the build phase, which is that follicular inner spring, it's asking yourself, well, how can I challenge myself in this phase? And maybe even what can I try that's new? Because this is a great time when we usually feel like fresh with ambition and being capable of new challenges, maybe putting ourselves out there in new ways. So if it's something you haven't done in a while, or you're starting a training plan, it really does line up with that. And again, how can I challenge myself? And then during ovulation, like we've kind of come through that whole first phase, and now you're at the peak. And I think it's a good time to start to reflect a little bit on what's working and maybe what's not working so much. Sort of like, how am I doing? And not just how am I doing, but how am I feeling about what I'm doing? Because you've now come through like your kind of your hustle phase, your push harder. And that's not to say you're not going to have any days in that first part where you want to rest or you want to take it a little slower, because it will be a bit of an ebb and flow. But this is a good sort of halfway point to look back on it and think of, what was my goal initially? And then how am I feeling about it now? And then in that last phase before the period, so that recovery phase, I think it really is about the body awareness and asking yourself, instead of looking at what's on the training plan and just doing that, what does my body feel like doing today? And if that doesn't line up with what you have on the plan, two things. One, either go out and do your warm up and try it anyway. So whether that's doing a brief swim, doing some light movements to prep you for your weightlifting, doing a 10-minute jog, easy, just to see how that feels. Usually after a warm up, you'll have a better idea of whether you just need to kind of slosh off the day and you're just needing to shake things up a little so that you are now like, oh, okay, now I can see doing this. Or in my experience, at least with myself, and again, and working with clients, it's like by that time you also know, like, no, I'm actually really tired today. And I'm going to change what my original plan was. Not that I'm not going to do it, but maybe I'm going to do it less intensely, or maybe I'm going to do less reps or less sets. Maybe I'm going to do something completely different if that's possible for you. And you might be, in the middle of a scheduled session that was with a personal trainer. You might be in a group class and wondering like, well, how do I navigate that? It's about you doing it differently for you. So you don't have to do what is being done on the outside. There's always ways you can change it, take the modification, and know that that's the best thing for your body that day. Going back to that question, what is the best thing for my body? Not, I think I said, what does my body feel like doing today? But maybe even a better way to do it or say it would be, for some of you who are like, yeah, but I feel like I wouldn't do anything because I tend to be unmotivated. Maybe ask yourself, what would best serve my body today? What does my, what's going to be the best thing for my body? Because you'll know then that, well, yeah, some movement is going to be helpful, but not at that level. So hopefully those questions kind of get you through the way that you think about this too, and not just focused on like, well, this is the kind of exercise I have to do in each of these phases, but more about this is the energy of each phase and how you meet it.
No, I love that explanation. I think that is going to be really helpful for everyone listening. And you, yes, answered a question I was going to ask, because I was like, well, I know there's going to be women listening that are like, but yeah, I don't really want to ever work out, but I know that I should.
Yeah, right. And that's a whole nother maybe conversation about, where our lack of motivation comes from in general, or have we not found something that really supports our desires for movement, and we're just trying to do things that we think we should do in terms of movement. I think a lot of times we're misaligned with like, well, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do, but yet we haven't really thought about, well, what does my body like to do? And maybe the answer, you think like, well, that's not considered exercise. Again, going back to those beliefs, like maybe your answer is, well, I like dancing and I have liked yoga in the past, but like, that's not hard enough, So again, that's a belief. I'm not saying that. That's a whole thought process of where can we shift our mindset around something, because is it actually true or not? And we might just be trying to do things that we don't have the desires for. And that's why we have that lack of motivation. That's just one little piece of that. But yeah, I think that if you are feeling like you're concerned, like, well, how do I work with this? Because what if I'm never motivated or I really struggle with that? I think this actually gives you a framework to feel like you have something to go off of, because a lot of times if you're in the mindset of like always going hard, or if you're in the mindset of on the other end of the spectrum of like, I just want to always take days off and not really move, this gives you a framework either way, because it allows you to see like, it's almost like if you had a schedule, that's better than going into something blindfolded. Like imagine you showed up at a running race, for example, and they were like, well, it's an infinite distance that you're going to run. Like, we're not going to tell you how long you're going to run. You're going to start right now, but we don't know where the finish line is. Like, it's just kind of unknown, right? Versus I'm going and I'm doing 3 miles and that's the race. So it's kind of the same thing when like, okay, this phase is what I'm focusing on here. Next phase is going to be about this, and you know what to expect. So I think that can it can alleviate some of that stress and overthinking about what you should be doing. And a lot of times that's getting in the way of the motivation piece too.
Yeah, I love that explanation. And it's like what I talk about a lot. It's like less can be more, because it's finding getting in that flow of like, what is nourishing your body from a movement perspective, right? And that's why I teach a lot of like ball release fascial work, or AKA stretching, right?
Yes.
And I know a lot of women will be doing it and they're like, I feel like it's doing nothing. And I'm like, no. If you feel like it's doing nothing, it's because we still have layers we need to get into, and you need to work on your breathing and doing these things that are like, when I do it, it's like, oh my gosh, I get done and I feel taller and longer than even sometimes doing like a full Pilates workout. Right. And, and so it's it's that balance. And that's why I think variety is also really important. And so I love the cyclical patterning and understanding that, and versus like trying to always do the same thing every day, which also by doing that can lead to injury and overuse. And, I talk to women who run a lot and I'm like, you need to do some more like strength and stability stuff, because if you're always running, your hip flexors are going to be so tight, and then you start having back problems and, all these things. So it's looking at it from like different perspectives and for different reasons, following and really listening to your body and being kind, like, because I hear from a lot of women, especially like when their period starts or it's about to, they're always like, oh, I'm bloated. And like in my core rehab program, they're like, I just don't feel my core connection the same. And they like get really frustrated. And
Mhm.
so I'm like, okay, well, instead of allowing that frustration to take over because you don't feel as good today as you did a week ago, like just embracing and being like, that's okay. Like it's,
Mhm.
in a couple days from now, you're going to feel it back just as good, if not better than you did before. But we're always in that, like, we want it to be this certain way every single day. And it's like, but we're women and that doesn't happen that way. And
It's not reality.
so
Yeah.
not
And
reality.
the reason you know that, and the reason that you can coach on that, even with the ball work of like, just stay with it, because if you create that body awareness and continue to stay with it, like you'll notice it. I think that would be my biggest encouragement piece for this too. If you're skeptical right now of like, yeah, I don't know if I would work out as much if I do this because I'm going to be taking this time off sort of thing, or following this downtime with, go time. It's You'll come to it through practice. Just like I was saying, the reason Erica could say that about the ball work and about what she experiences is because she's experienced it in her body and knows what that feels like. And so I know it's asking you to, all of you listening, to take a step and try this and implement it. But that really is the only way that you'll experience what it feels like in your body, and how it can actually be such a superpower because your cyclical nature is there regardless of whether you're recognizing it or not. And if you choose to work with it instead of against it, it's obviously going to be easier, right? I mean, that seems so clear to me now because I have practiced it. So you just have to start, and just understanding it from this perspective, hopefully after listening, without taking any other action, just having that in the back of your head will probably start to allow you to look at your movement and your motivation differently as you move forward from here. And of course, after that, you can go deeper and look at tracking these things and understanding your cycle better, and how to really formulate your own workout plan based on that. But that's part two. That awareness is going to be super powerful.
Oh yeah. Awareness is the first step to changing absolutely anything. We talk about that
Yeah.
all the time here.
Yeah.
Um, Amazing. I just want to ask one last question. Is there any other suggestions or tips that you haven't shared yet that you want to make sure to share with everybody before we wrap up?
Hmm. I think just what we were saying about, or just what I was just saying about, how start with this awareness, take this into the movement you're doing now, and don't beat yourself up over having these thoughts or feeling unmotivated or feeling like, oh, I'm this hustle person who's burning myself out. So how do I ever get out of this? Just start to become aware of how you operate within your different phases that you're going through, because like I said, those phases are happening. And so the way you're connecting with them is going to be interesting to notice. And then if you are someone who already tracks your workouts or plans them, I would say that step two for you would be, beyond that awareness, is to actually start to track what day you're on in your cycle with the workout that you're doing, and take note of how you're feeling, just with a simple number rating. Like I give a 1 to 3 in my workout journal template in my courses. Like 1 is, this wasn't the best at all. Why am I even out here doing this? Totally bad choice for today. 2 is like, it was average. And then 3 is, it was awesome. So just even a few simple numbers and rating them. There's other things to track too, to really give you more information, but just to walk away with one thing. If you are tracking your workouts, or if you're someone who already tracks your cycle and you're doing it for maybe fertility reasons or for other reasons with your hormones, then start to track your workouts alongside that so that you can notice those phases a little bit better. I think putting what is now in your head about this on paper with your own body is just going to be like the next level. So I'll leave you with that in case you're already at the point of noticing some of this, but you need to actually take it and see it in patterns, like month to month.
Yeah, great advice. Please track your cycles, ladies, if you're not. And if you are not having a cycle, get a moon app. It's amazing.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. Thanks for adding that again. Yeah. And just follow it that way. Day one is the new moon and go from
Yep.
there.
I love that. Well, Jenni, will you share
Yeah.
with everyone where they can reach out to you, find out more about you and your programs and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to hear from you after this, especially if you still have questions and you're wondering something specific. I really would love to hear from you. You can get in touch with me on my website, jennihulburt.com, and it's Jenni with an I, Hulburt. Everything is there, including my FemFit programs that you can dive into this more.
Thank you so much, Jenni. This has been amazing.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation.